from Modus Create.
Howdy. So first, I want to say, if you can't see me, I'm sorry. I'm short. Okay, so I will try my best to project my. I need that one.
Yep, you got it.
To project my voice as much as possible. If for whatever reason you cannot hear me, and I don't see you waving, height issue, throw something at me. Okay. So thank you very much for the warm introduction. I am happy to be here and talk about the Atlantic Wire application that we developed at Modus Create. Let's see if we have screen. Can you guys see that okay? Okay, and awesome neck-breaking screen. That's sweet, huh?
Oh, you're jacked in, right?
Yeah, I'm totally jacked in, man. So let me just go ahead and start this bad boy. So, who here who has had experience or knows anything about Sencha Touch at all? Okay. Of you guys, a lot of experience, minimal experience? What are you like? Yeah, a little bit. Okay. So the purpose of this this presentation is kind of explain to you what Sencha Touch is. I realize that this is a jQuery meetup, and we're very happy to show what the framework can do. I'm going to do my best to dive into a lot of technical stuff and explain what Sencha Touch is from a top level, but also dive into how we use it and how we create custom components to drive this application. A few words about us. My business partner here, Pat Sheridan, and I co-founded Modus Create back in early 2011. We started focusing on Sencha-based solutions for various customers, and this is a small sample of what we've done in the past. Some of our customers include Intuit, Blue Cross Blue Shield, PBS, and literally the list goes on. And I've been fortunate to have had such an awesome team of almost 20 folks right now in the less than 2 years we've been in business join us and create these awesome things. And if you guys are interested more as to what we do and would like to get challenged, and also work with a bunch of kick-ass developers, we're hiring. So feel free to get in touch with myself or Pat or anyone from our website. So Sencha Touch, what is it? Sencha Touch is a framework. A lot of folks want to immediately compare jQuery Mobile to Sencha Touch. With Sencha Touch, comparing it to jQuery Mobile is like comparing apples to oranges. You just don't do it. They can give you something on the surface that may look the same, but underneath the hood, they're vastly different. Sencha Touch came out back in, I want to say, early 2010, late 2009, with their 1.0 version, and they were primarily focused on WebKit only. And that is because back when the Apple 3G iPhone was out, it delivered the best experience for HTML5. It wasn't awesome, but it did a pretty good job. Today, they're actually focusing on getting Windows Phone 9 support, Windows Phone 8 support and IE 10 support in their next version, which I think is 2.2, which will be coming out. But Sencha Touch from the ground up is designed to allow you to build mobile applications that feel like native applications. And what we've found through the years of experience is that the limiting factor often isn't the technology that you use, but generally the device that you're implementing on, and oftentimes the design patterns that you've implemented. A lot of folks we've seen develop applications using jQuery Mobile, Sencha Touch, anything out there. And what they do is they develop web applications that very much are single-page apps. They refresh, or they'll throw really heavy data at it, or just do things like demand a lot of data through the wire, through the wireless stream. And different devices are going to give you different experiences. And that section is broadening. I mean, we have BlackBerry 10 coming out soon. It's been hailed as a pretty damn good phone. It's just one more thing we have to do. So let's all be happy that more devices are coming out. Gives us more jobs, right? Gives us more work to do. The trick definitely becomes, how do you get the most experience or the best experience from each device? And that's where, unfortunately, research and trial and error come into play. So, like I said earlier, Sencha Touch 2. It's a component-based library. It has a bunch of utilities underneath the hood, such as a template engine that allow you to express using JavaScript strings, tokens that can be placed, very much like Mustache.js if you use that. But underneath the hood, it has something called the full component lifecycle. That is, if you create an instance of a panel, for example, you will know that that panel will behave take part in a three-phase lifecycle. Initialization generally is when a component wakes up or becomes instantiated. Things like base level events get set up. The component can figure out whether it's going to render or not. The render phase is generally when it's injected into the DOM, and destruction is when we actually remove the item from the DOM and we kind of do our best to quote unquote destroy the component or remove it from memory. Under the hood, Sencha Touch has a pretty damn well-designed class inheritance model. If you take a look at the documentation, you'll immediately notice that it is very well designed. It's a pretty large framework. There are lots of things to learn about it, and that's one of the limiting factors about it is it's kind of a steep learning curve. If you come from a classical programming language background, learning Sencha Touch isn't going to be that difficult because of the design patterns that they've implemented. Underneath the hood, they also implement what's called the observable event model, and that means that you can easily hook up events on your components and elements. And it actually does some things to make programming apps a little bit easier. For example, no such thing as a double tap event on elements in the browser. That's technically reserved for the browser. It's for zooming. If you go to a normal website, you double tap, you're going to zoom in or potentially zoom out. Well, Sencha Touch works with the DOM to synthesize those events for you. It also comes with something called what I like to call an elaborate container model. So that is, you can have components that have child components inside of them, and it uses layout managers to organize items on screen. And what makes Sencha Touch really fast is that it implements CSS3 layout system. So the CSS3 box model, for example, is used all over the place to get the fastest UI for the device that you're using. So I talked a little bit about the class system. Now, the class system is like one of those hidden gems inside the framework itself. I always like to say that it implements great design patterns. I've had experience with a lot of different JavaScript frameworks and libraries out there, including ones that have their own class system. And Sencha Touch is one of those class systems that seems to be very well thought out. You can do things like register a class using string notation. Okay, so myapp.view.somePanel. You go to define it, and if in your global window object myapp is not defined, the class system will define it for you. If the view namespace isn't defined, it'll define it for you. So you can have elaborate namespacing without having to worry about setting up your namespaces manually. The class registration is relatively simple. They have an exe-defined design pattern that they set up. You can choose to automatically require, through web services, other classes or inject them automatically. That's called the class dependency system, and that works in conjunction with the class loading system. So oftentimes you want to define a certain set of classes in a namespace. You can programmatically instantiate a class, and if those classes are not in memory, it's going to go ahead and make requests from your web server to do so. It makes debugging awesome and a pain in the butt at the same time. The awesome part is that you can make changes and dynamically load classes when you need them. The bad part is they use a cache busting mechanism where they append a date timestamp at the end of the request. So that means if you try to set a breakpoint and you refresh your browser, because the name is technically different in the browser, it's a new file, you lost your breakpoint in the browser. So I just learned to give up breakpoints unless I know I'm going to be reenacting a certain error condition. Else I'll just use like a conditional debug statement. So really quick overview about Sencha Touch. I didn't want to spend a ton of time on that. I wanted to focus more about the Atlantic Wire Touch as they've named it. The purpose of this app was to deliver an amazing experience with HTML5 for the iPad. Now we focused on the iPad because iOS still today has the best performance, bar none. It has been that way historically. The future will tell whether it will continue to be that way. I mean, the iPhone 5 is the best mobile browser implementation to date. So who knows? Maybe it'll continue to stay that way. But we did it because we had time constraints, and it made sense to focus on their largest mobile customer base. We leveraged the best Sencha Touch 2 design patterns. Okay, so we followed the best practices to a T. we also created our own design patterns, which I will show you a few in a little bit. This app will allow users to curate their own feed. So you have an opportunity to say, well, if I'm reading an article about Justin Bieber, I want to see more about Justin Bieber. So you click a button, and what that does is save data to local storage. You can click on, I'll show you in a little bit, a little My Wire button, and it makes a request. Now you see all these awesome stories about Justin Bieber. Okay, so this app also works pretty well in both orientations. We had, and I'll show you in a little bit, we found some interesting behaviors when it came to how the iOS implementation of WebView behaves. So that is, if you embed WebView in your application or you add the app to your home screen, it behaves a little bit different on orientation change than it does when you're looking at mobile Safari. We also had some fun integrating with the Atlantic Wire's Omniture and advertising solutions. Who here has had to deal with advertising on web pages? Is it awesome? Yeah, I saw some no's. So yeah, as awesome as it is when you're building a web page, that is, you're loading a web page and building it in a DOM, it's less than awesome when you have to deal with it in a single page app. And ultimately what we do is we build single page applications. So let's walk through this real quick. I guess that looks all right. Let's see if I can make this a little bit bigger. Nope, 100%. All right, so this application has custom views that allow users to interact very much like they would in a normal magazine. We have a set of 5 stories that they can slide left to right from, and here what we're using is the Sencha Touch carousel. Now, the Sencha Touch carousel component is a component that allows you to keep, at most, 3 items in the DOM at the same time. So we have one application that we developed for them using the NPR API called Discover Music. And what we did when the application bootstraps is we instantiate 64 different child items for that carousel. And we found that we could throw 1,000 at it. The instantiation phase would be a little bit slow, but rendering phase would be super fast. And that's because Sencha Touch will dynamically add items to the DOM either in the prefetch or the trailing areas. And that's how we can quickly load items from left to right. Now you're seeing a delay here for the advertising, and I will explain to you why that is. So we could select, for example, this awesome article about Goodbye 30 Rock. And we can read the article. And let's say we want to see more about Tina Fey. We can tap this button. We have feedback. And if I hit the back button, I can click My Wire and hopefully see more articles about Tina Fey. So at this point, I can set up different feeds for myself. I can add or subtract. Let's say if I didn't want to see more about Tina Fey, or I didn't want to see so much about, let's say, Kenneth Branagh, whatever you say her name. Thank you. I could select neither. So I think it was New York Times inspired component. AOL Editions inspired. Thank you. So you have this custom component that we developed using the Sencha Touch X template engine. So I could rotate the phone and we get somewhat of a different experience. Now we scroll top to bottom and we can see that the advertising is a little bit different and that right-hand side navigation pane is gone. So we make that slide in, and I can go ahead and select more, and so on and so forth. So we also have a small, I think, 10-item carousel at the top, and you can manage your feed. So here I wanted to see a lot more about Coke and Pepsi because I've gained some weight. I'm like, yeah, buddy, I want some more sugar. So if I decide in the future that I don't want to see more about this stuff, I can click the X button, and that would eventually stop being seen. I can also tap the middle button, which basically will say, okay, I really don't care about it, show it to me. And what we do is we actually just implement CSS3 transitions over time. So it gives you a pretty cool experience. Now you have the opportunity to save items. So that is, if I want to save this for later, I say, oh my God, my train's here, I got to go. I can save it for later, come back, and if it's no longer in the feed, I can tap on the item, and voila, we have our article again. And if for whatever reason I wanted to remove it, click Edit. Here we're using CSS3 transitions or animations to give this little wobble effect. I can click the X, he's gone, we're over. So that's a quick overview of the application. Any questions thus far? Yes?
Yeah, how do you store the actual preferences of the user? Is that like the client-side database, like HTML5 things?
No, we're using local storage.
Local storage,
Yeah, the web SQL is not really supported by all browsers in the same way. In fact, my memory serves properly. It's not even it's out of the spec for HTML5 per the W3C. So, any other questions? Yes.
Hey Jay, did you package it with PhoneGap? And if so, why not?
We didn't because the client wanted to deliver it through HTML5 channels, so through the web primarily. There would be no performance advantage if we packaged it, in case anyone was wondering, and I'll show you why in a second. Any other questions?
So if you go to the Atlantic, then it will forward you to the Touch website if you're on an iPad. Is that correct?
They have not implemented that yet,
Okay.
but that is this is an alternate channel. In fact, I was thinking the inverse. That is, if you went to this on Chrome, touch.atlanticwire.com, you will still get this. So that is a feature that needs to be added soon. So if you went to this on your phone, for example,
Right.
you would get this UI.
Okay.
So I saw a hand being raised. Yes.
What can it do without a connection? Like if you save a story for later.
Right. So it doesn't cache. It doesn't cache data for images. So it's not a full offline application, and it can't be because a lot of the Atlantic Wire content actually is stuff that is online. For example, that Tina Fey story, which hopefully I could find in a second. Get back here, dude. Never mind. I was trying to pull up a story where you actually have YouTube feeds. So what they'll do is they'll have stuff from different sites, and it would be impossible to cache that data. Any other questions? Awesome. All right, so what I'm going to walk you through is some of the code to get from where we saw the carousel to actually viewing an article to the point where we're actually sending off a shotgun blast to their Omniture analytics engine. So, the design team included Pat Sheridan, who's our CEO. We have Dave Ackerman here as an awesome cook, and myself as a developer. So to develop this application, we used MVC. Now, the culture with Sencha Touch is that so much where if you follow their design patterns, you're very much like Rails. You will be guided to glory. Not always the case, but it's a good nudge in the right direction. So we follow that design pattern to a T. We developed highly efficient custom views. And sometimes that meant using CSS3 to hide and show things when the orientation change happened. And the reason we did that, as I'll show you in a little bit, sometimes we saw some performance issues where we relied on Sencha Touch's event engine to listen to the DOM when the orientation changed. We wanted it to work faster. So Dave actually would spend a few hours reverse engineering how things would work and came up with a better solution sometimes. As the question was asked, yes, we're using local storage to save article data. We do have a custom Sass theme. So Sencha Touch 2 is highly customizable. Very much like if you were to look at a first generation iPhone app that someone, say Hello World app, it looks like every other basic iPhone app out there. Sencha Touch 2 does have its own basic theme, but it is highly customizable. And when you get to the point where you're developing an application like this, where it's pretty much all custom, then developing your custom theme in Sass becomes very important to your workflow. Now, they have something called the SDK tools, which the new name is now Sencha CMD or Sencha Command. It is a suite of command line utilities that allow you to go from starting an application to maintaining an application all the way through to deployment. Now, I didn't add this to the slides, but there's an awesome feature for Sencha Touch where when you go to the build phase or the production phase of your application, Sencha Touch has something called Blink inside of it. It's not very advertised, but it's there. It is a technology that essentially uses local storage to cache your application data. So that is, I go to a production version of my app, customer loads the app for the first time, the JavaScript is fed into local storage. I'll show you in a little bit what that looks like. And every time thereafter, the client will load the application, and the first request is for the page, the second request is for what's called app.json. This is a descriptor file that shows what files have been modified and any deltas that need to be appended to the instance of local storage that they have. If there's a change, the app can reload if it needs to, or it can be deferred to the next launch. and it makes applications on slow connections launch really fast locally. It's insane, and it's one of the coolest things that many people don't talk about that this framework has support for. This application also has history and router support. So one of the things I wanted to show you is that when you go to view an article, whatever, what you see is this awesome hash mark. And Sencha Touch uses the browser's history engine support to allow you to do things like have history. So if I wanted to email someone, for example, this article or tweet it, which may not work here. Yeah, I'm not logged in here. But my point is that, oh, that's awesome. They changed that. It used to be the article. Oh, that's less than awesome. Anyway, the idea is that you would be able to email the exact link, and the app loads it just fine. In fact, I should be able to do this. Come on. I click too fast sometimes. Let's open a new tab. Paste. There we go. So we're viewing the article right away. So that can be tremendously helpful. So the MVC architecture looks very much like this. The little yellow sticky things are views, the green tubey things are stores, and the blue things are controllers. So what you'll notice is that Central Hub is the app controller. In the world of Sencha Touch, your application architecture begins with the world of controllers, where they are singletons, and you have one instance of a controller. So the application instance basically is an instance of exe.application, where he is a subclass of exe.controller, essentially, and he controls many controllers. So it's a controller for controllers. And in that application, you can describe things like what icons you would want to use for your iOS instance, for example, whether they should be glossy, what the title of the app should be, and so on and so forth. But this app instance basically is mainly responsible not just for setting the application up, but for listening for global application events. And one such global application event is Omniture, their analytics engine. So I'll show you in a little bit how that works. Any questions on what you see up here right now? Yes?
Where's the model here?
The model is a supporting class for the store. And I don't diagram that out because it would just make it really big. But for every data store, we typically have one or more models. So in this app, I set up the main controller for being responsible for article data loading. So there was some special massaging that we had to do to get the data that came in from their API to work with the Sencha Touch 2 views that we created. Essentially, it's the application's backbone. It does manage 7 views and 3 data stores. Now, the reason it manages 7 views is because some of these views are really simple views, and all they do is show up for the first time you launch the application, and that's it. So rather than create another controller and bloat the code base, it made sense a lot of times to just say, hey, look, I'm just going to use the main controller to manage this. He's basically the catch-all. He handles what I call all the outside navigation. So that is the very first time you tap on an article, which I will walk you through in a little bit. Let's say from the carousel, he handles that tap event from that carousel. He fetches the data that he needs to fetch, and then he fires a routing event, essentially. And from there, we go to launch the actual article view itself. It does handle the major interactions. So that is, if you go to tap on, for example, when we are in portrait mode and you go to tap on this guy here, it's a global-based event. This is what I like to call a tag manager sheet. There's no point in having a controller for 2 events, essentially. So we have main controller manage him. So in the Sencha Touch 2 worlds, you work very much where you're dealing with component-based events. You can deal with element-based events, but element-based events are typically events that are listened to by your custom views, your custom components. Here, what I'm doing is describing I like to call a control construct. When I describe my controller, I can give it what's called component queries. That is, they are very much like CSS-style queries or selectors, but very much like for this Sencha Touch world, where you can say, I would like to listen for a component who has a type value of carousel layout, listen for his article tap event, and call my onArticleTap method. Same thing goes for this more stories thing. We reuse the same method. More stories is a shortcut class name called an xtype. We listen to its article tap event and call the same onArticleTap method, and so on and so forth. And if you look towards the middle, you see this tag manager button text equals close. We're able to describe ancestry. So tag manager is a class who has a button as a child who has a text value of close. And when that tap event is fired on that component, call this large method called onTagManagerCloseButtonTap. Whew, that is it's a large word. Anyway, so let's pretend you tapped on an item in the carousel. Well, onArticleTap's going to be fired. And in the Sencha Touch world, what we do is we fire events and we pass the event emitter as the first argument, and then any data as arguments thereafter. So onArticleTap has a view argument that would be whatever view is firing that event. If we needed to know about it, we could do something like tell it to hide, destroy, go fly to the moon for all we know. But in this method, it's really simple. If for whatever reason ID is not there, we show an alert and we finish off, we return. And the reason we did that is because we actually had some articles that didn't have IDs, which are essential for loading from their API. So we put this quick patch in there to prevent people from showing a load mask, essentially, and directing themselves into a box for which they had to reload the page from. So what we see here is this redirect to method call. And what we're doing is we're saying, hey, you exe application instance, basically add to your history article / and then the ID. So redirect to is a utility method that allows the application to fire off routes. And onRouterArticle is a event handler for the routing system. So what we're doing is we're tossing over to the event system, the history system. Hey, look, we're going to load this article, and then when the routing system fires its event, we catch it. And it's the way it has to work, unfortunately. I say unfortunately because there are some things that I would like the browser to be able to do, like pass complex objects over with routes, but it would make the URLs look ridiculous, so we don't do that. So onRouterArticle catches the article routes event, essentially, and does a JSONP request. JSONP, we're using it because it is calling from a different domain, and we have a handler, a success handler, called on after article load. So here we sit in the main controller. Main controller listened to the article tap event. We called the history's redirect to, and we caught the redirection. Now this one's big. Essentially, what he does is he massages some data, deals with some string manipulation, and loops through and grabs a few things to show the article. The important part is at the very bottom, which I realize now that this is a big room and it's really hard to see. So give me 1 second. Let me pull this up, and I can pull it up in my IDE, and it'll make a lot more sense. It'll be easier to see, and hopefully you won't have to hurt your neck looking at that screen. Where were we? Main controller. There we go. On after article load. There we go. Okay, is this a lot easier to see? Well, if I could get back there. There we go. So after we do some data manipulation, what we do is we fire an application level event. So we execute me.getApplication. The world of Sencha Touch is as such where you define your classes, and that creates automatic getters and setters for you. When you create an instance of a controller, which here we're looking at the main controller, we get the application instance by using the local API method getApplication. So we're firing the event, we're passing the article object, and some other data that the article view needs to know to bootstrap itself. So if I were to go to the article controller, I can show you. I'm pretty much done with slides for now. It's easier if I just show it you this way. When the controller itself bootstraps and goes through its initialization phase, it subscribes to the show article event from the application level. So think of this article as kind of like a message bus where you're just broadcasting a message. So the article controller will listen to the show article event, and he's going to call this on-app show article method. This function is going to do a bunch of things for data, but the important part is to know whether or not it has an article view in the what's called the viewport. When you bootstrap a Sencha 2 application, a singleton called ext viewport is created, and he is where everything is pretty much rendered. So to show an article view, we add a child to that viewport, and we use its add method. And what's cool about this is I can just express what's called an X-type object. It is an object that has a shortcut method, or a shortcut descriptor. This one's not really so much of a shortcut. This can be changed. But the idea is that I can tell it to add and show immediately, and boom, we see the view. If for whatever reason the article view is in place, and I can show you an instance in the UI where it's required, then we tell the article view reference to update itself and change a couple of things with the enable, disable, save button. So let me walk you through really quickly what that looks like. So if I were to go here, now article view is in the DOM. An instance of him is available. I click on this more stories button, and I want to read another article. We already had an article view in place. Why would we want to run another one? So this is where this little if condition comes into play. Okay. The last bit about this method is actually pretty important. This awesome do omniture function. I hate omniture. Okay, I'm sorry, I had to say that. Omniture is one of those technologies that I looked at and I said, who would ever think to do this? What the hell's S? What's T? What? Anyway, sorry, little rant there. So what we did was we structured very much in an application fashion how to manage these omniture events. So what we do is we create an object with the custom data that's required, and we fire an application level event. We just called it omniture. Okay. So here we have the article controller. The main controller fired an event to show an article. The article controller fires an event to update omniture. And now the application controller is going to capture that event and actually do the omniture publishing. So if I were to pop open the app.js file, and I can show you, here we go, where we register the event handler. This is the reference to the application instance itself. On omniture event, called on omniture as a method signature within the scope of this. Sencha Touch is very scope heavy. So when we register event handlers, we have to register with that event publisher or the event registration the scope to which to fire the event handler. And on omniture takes that object, does some massaging because we have base configurations to apply, and we set a couple of things, put stuff to lowercase, and then we call the awesome what we call omni.t, which I end up using a window.omniture reference for, to emit the stuff to omniture. This happened to be the most awesome fun I ever had building this application. It was lovely. So I just walked through a bunch of code. Any questions about this? I realized I went from here to there to here to there. Yes?
What's Omniture?
Okay, Omniture is an analytics system, very much like Google Analytics. That's about as much as I know about it. Back there, yes, sir.
I saw you guys go.
No.
The URL, the data API was 0.1. Did you build the JSON endpoint?
No, that was something that the Atlantic Wire did.
And were you able to ask for extra stuff, or did you?
Yes, we worked in concert with them to get this application running. So there were certain times, like remember I showed that the ID was missing. Very soon I imagine they're going to set up registration keys like any other API would. So I strongly advise against, polling, because I don't know if it's open right now. I mean, any guy can open up a Firebug or Chrome debug tools and figure out what the requests are, but I wouldn't abuse it. Is all I'm trying to ask you not to do. Anyway, I don't get in trouble, man. Yes.
Do you have any subviews?
Yes. In fact, that's an awesome question. I'm going to show you some abstraction. This is where I was saying about the the design pattern stuff. So before I show you the code, which there's a lot of it, but it all makes sense in a second, if I were to go back to the application, I'll show you that this carousel here looks different. So you notice the advertising's on the left, here's on the right, on the left, on the right, and if I were to rotate this guy, now we have advertising in the middle, on the bottom, and probably eventually on the top. Okay? So we had a lot of commonality between these different layouts. Dealing with that document.write, which I'll describe in a little bit, that was the second awesome thing I had to deal with this application. There's a lot of discovery there and a lot of aha moments and holy crap moments. But very much in like with any classic programming language, you want to put your reusable stuff in an abstract class. So that's what we did. We had something called add selectors that we set up, add layouts, and so on and so forth. The important part here is add template. Okay, so this is technically an instance of what's called ext template, and it's a string that has tokens. Tokens, very much like mustache. Instead of having 2 curly braces, they use 1. Okay, so I'm going to call template, pass him an object. He's going to stuff in position, size, ord as data points. Now, we have some reusable stuff like listening to the tap event, for example, on the carousel item. We have reusable stuff like grabbing the data. What is the article that's being tapped, and so on and so forth? What is the method for which it's being tapped? Getting a reference to the ad script itself. Injecting the ad, which I'll show you a preview for in a second. Okay, so we have a bunch of stuff that we have that is reusable. Now we stuff all that crap in what we call abstract layout, and what that leaves, literally, is extensions that have nothing but HTML templates in them. So here we're rendering each carousel item, and we're taking data tokens out of them. That's it. And we're stuffing in different data points, and that renders these guys. So we have 2 main sections. We have an awesome design pattern. And it's easy to see when you look at the code in a whole. Horizontal layout, or the landscape layout, portrait layout. That's layout 1. Check out layout 2. Landscape layout, portrait layout. So it's very cool when you start to develop design patterns with this framework. You can reuse them, and now you have layer abstraction that you can use. So yes, views can have subviews. An example of that is something we call the skybox. So in the article that I posted on our blog, moduscreate.com/blog, I was going to type it in the URL, and I realized that's not a good idea. I described a challenge that we had to render what we call the skybox here in the most efficient manner. That is, not using components and components and components and components. One of the dirty little secrets about Sencha Touch is that it uses a lot of DOM, okay? And that scares a lot of people away. I taught a jQuery class to some folks up in New York City who were very interested in learning a lot about Sencha Touch. So I said, okay, let's take an hour or 2 and walk through this. And they said, well, okay, let's see what the DOM looks like. And like one girl was like, oh my God. And I was like, yeah, well, but what you get is pretty awesome stuff if you don't abuse it. And that's what we at our company work very hard not to do. So in the skybox view, you'll see that we have something called items here. So I'll walk you through a definition really quickly of how classes are defined. So we call ext define. We set up our namespace using string notation, okay, or a string. We tell it which class to extend, and we give it what's called an X type, which is a shortcut object. So we can create instances of this class by just telling a panel to set a child items, and very much like we do here. So I'm defining a height of 153 pixels, which layout to implement, a custom CSS class, and some child component items. So this is fun. So here we have what's called a component, base component, and we're giving it an HTML declaration, okay? Let's make this a little wider. Here we have an image with a source tag for wire-logo.png. He has a width of 164 and a height of 91. And if I were to, there we go. That's this guy right here. Inside that, we have a sub-component, a container instance, for which he only has a horizontal scrollable component and we give him a custom template to render. So what's cool is we can tell Sencha Touch, I would like you to render this component, but when I tell you to marry this data to it, you will now have a custom view that uses all your CSS styling and all the interactions you want, but you get all the slider goodness that you would expect from this framework. So this one skybox component is what I like to call a composite component. It is technically a container subclass, but internally has two child components inside of it. Other questions? Sweet. Okay, so I walked you through these slides. So I wanted to show you some of the challenges we worked through. I alluded to a few of them earlier, but I'm going to talk to you in a little bit much greater detail. The two challenges I will highlight in greater detail are the advertising solution integration and the performance differences between the iOS integrated web view and mobile Safari. Now, does anyone remember here when the Nitro engine, or does anyone know what the Nitro engine is for JavaScript? Okay, well, when this thing was introduced, for those who don't know, there was a huge uproar in the mobile web community where Apple says, hey, look, when you're using mobile Safari, you're going to get the fastest JavaScript engine that we can provide. It's a JIT compiler, okay, so just-in-time compiler, gives you the fastest thing that we can give. But if you package your app in PhoneGap or anything else, you get the piece of shit JavaScript engine, which actually is pretty damn fast, okay? So a lot of people said, well, why is it that we're getting this awesome stuff in mobile web view, but you're limiting us when we want to give a full application experience inside of HTML? It turns out it's some type of security thing, and that's as far as I'll go with it. Yes?
Wasn't there something also about when you're in web view, you don't get local storage?
No, you still get it. The issue...
You're not guaranteed to exist?
You're never, ever guaranteed to... Right.
I mean, it can disappear on you.
Right. I think it's like in /temp in the system or something like that, where it can be purged whenever the device needs to...
But not if you were in Safari.
I
Safari doesn't do it, but web view does.
Okay, that's good to know. I didn't know that. That's
yeah, like somebody, what happened to my settings?
That's pretty cool. So that's why when we package our apps, we use PhoneGap and we put stuff in like SQLite. Makes life easier. So the performance differences that I wanted to highlight weren't really so much from the JavaScript perspective, but at the CSS engine perspective. And this was a holy crap moment. We spent a few days trying to figure out what was going on. And no one I talked to, including the senior designers that I've dealt with in the world of mobile development, could figure out or explain what happens. It just is, and it's kind of like, law of gravity. It happens, whatever. So, advertising challenge. I am not someone who had a lot of experience with advertising before. So this was a huge whoa moment for me. Existing solutions use document.write. Now this method is available to you when you are rendering a page. Okay, so imagine your page is being written in a DOM. When that page cycle is done, the rendering phase is done, document.write is dead. Okay, it's done. There's no more document.write. Well, if document.write is required for your advertising, then how the hell are you going to load your advertising on demand? I mean, we have a single page app here.
iframe?
We tried that. iframes have its own challenges, and they suck. Ironically, I will show you something cool. Ironically, iframes turn out to be a pretty awesome solution for really high-performing apps in HTML5. Let me see if I can do this. Hold on. All right, everybody turn away. I'm just kidding. Let's see. What is my password again? Wrong. All right, I won't show you. All right. Well, if you take your phone and go to fb.html5isready.com and log in with Facebook, we'll have to edit that out of the video. Awesome. The purpose is that Sencha is working on a new technology that uses iframes that makes their applications fly. And 2.2 alpha or beta 1 is supposed to have some of this event stuff in it. Absolutely fantastic. What they did was they developed like 50% of the Facebook application in the browser. I mean, the thing was ridiculously fast. Stupid fast on the iPhone 5. On the iPhone 4, it was really good. So, sorry, I have to poo-poo on iframes because we do have issues that we don't expect. And I can show you one in a second. Hold on. Let's change this back to an iPad here. There we go. So if I were to pull up the Atlantic Wire again, not show my password again. Where was I going? So I'll take a few seconds to try to... There we go. Okay. YouTube employs HTML5 for their videos. In fact, this is actually one of those things that we're dealing with a prototype application that we're doing for some blogging material. And when you're using a scroller here, this is a really sexy scroller. In fact, there are like one or two other solutions out there that get as close to this. Okay, our Sencha team, Jackie Nguyen over there, has worked really hard to make this as sexy as possible. This is great. When you grab the iframe, no worky. Okay? It was one of those things we just kind of said, okay, well, just don't scroll on that. And it turns out if you actually had an embedded HTML5 video, the same thing would happen. There's something about the event capturing that does not get down to the element enough to make the page scroll like you would expect. So, iframes suck and are awesome at the same time. Sorry, there's a little ADD there. Where was I going with this? Yes. So, document.write. So we did try iframes once. I also tried a proxy. And like, remember how earlier I talked to you about the delay? And that is because we are trying to get this DOM element in there. Now, the traditional way of doing things is they inject a script tag. That script tag is going to a third party. That's loading JavaScript, which is figuring out where in the DOM it is, grabbing stuff, injecting iframe content in that script tag's parent element, and so on and so forth. And sometimes it goes like 6-7 levels deep to hide itself, whatever. Not easy in DOM that is already built. In fact, if you go to an existing page and type document.write, and you'll see it's just not going to work in this WebKit browser. So we had to figure out a way to do it. And I'm happy to say, because I found a solution that worked very quickly, but I'm also sad to say that I'm not smart enough to figure this crap out myself. So I was lucky to find this awesome tool called Write Capture. Write Capture uses jQuery to fake out DOM. Now, I took 2 days to try to figure out how this stuff works. And this guy who wrote this thing is a freaking genius. Because it creates its own DOM structure with its own DOM method. So when it loads the script tag thinks it is in a web page somewhere. And it tries to inject elements with document.write, and Write Capture captures it and returns it back to your caller and injects it into the DOM where you wanted it to. Awesome. Absolutely awesome. And it's one of the coolest things that I had seen done with jQuery from a hacking perspective. And it works fantastically. So our implementation was really simple. Inject add would be called, and we would get a bunch of references, and we'd call upon Write Capture after using a jQuery selector and execute its HTML method and pass in the script tag. Remember that script tag I showed you with those templates? Well, script is a reference to the merged data. It's a string. So Write Capture is going to create a pseudo DOM, make the request for the script element, capture the DOM's element, document.write, and it's freaking magic. I mean, this was fantastic when we figured out that this worked. And this allows for things like impressions. We initially implemented a proxy, a PHP proxy, that worked really well. We'd make a JSON request, pass in the script reference. It would fake out the request using curl, grab the actual body that the script was going to make. We'd grab that in a JSON string and throw it in the DOM. And we found out that our customers weren't really happy about that because all their impressions came from one server. And the advertisers would have really poo-pooed on that. So we decided to go back to using this Write Capture thing, and it's been fantastic. So this other one's going to surprise you a little bit. So iOS fires layout changes differently for when and how you use WebKit. And I haven't tested this on the iPhone, but I know it definitely works this way on the iPad. So I remember Dave and I just screaming, wow, what the... Why? It makes no sense. And this all came from the fact that when we rotate the device, okay, notice how it is rotating, and after the rotation occurs, we see the DOM changes. Okay, if we had the physical device, we could actually rotate it, and it would be exactly how the simulator shows. The DOM is affected afterwards. Now, I took the liberty of embedding this application here, and what you notice, I'll have to slow it down for you. The layout occurs before the device is rotated. Really, like, it just made no sense. And if I were to go back, I have to put on slow animation again, sorry. There we go. You can see that when the orientation finishes, then the relayout occurs. And we were getting reports that it was slow in certain directions and certain times it was fast, and it just made no sense. So we created this really simple, awesome media query to test it. And this is really awesome. So if I go back to slow animations, we see exactly what we saw in the Atlantic Wire application. Whereas the color changes, that is, the relayout occurs after the animation or the rotation occurs. Now, if we were to embed this application, this is probably going to be like the most advanced application I've ever built. It happens before. So if I were to flip, isn't that cool, huh? You don't see a second one here, but you'll see a second viewport rendered and implemented at the bottom. So that blew our mind, and we realized that we shouldn't continue mucking with it. So we learned that, okay, well, it just works that way because it does. Trying to figure it out wasn't something. I mean, I even talked to some WebKit developers, and they're just like, yeah, Apple touched the code. I have no clue. I'm like, all right, dude. I'm done talking about it. I thought it was one of those cool things that folks in the mobile WebKit world should know about. I haven't tested to see if this works the same way in Android. Again, Apple I know does like to muck with stuff. If you've ever had the pain of dealing with the iOS 6 Safari debug tools, you'll know what I mean. So, any questions regarding this? I hope I didn't put you guys to sleep too much. Yes?
So that thing you showed, you abandoned that red, blue, square thing that rotated?
It's just a simple media query, yeah.
So you didn't end up using that in the final cut? Or you did?
In the what?
In the Atlantic Wire?
This was a predecessor for some of the media queries that we ended up implementing.
So you just
Well, right. I mean, we didn't make the color change, but it explained why we saw the differences. And I will tell you that we use media. Darn it, wrong window. If I were to go back here to the UI, not there. Certain things like oh god, certain things like hiding views were orders of magnitude faster if we use CSS3 than when we use Sencha Touch. So like this little button here, it kind of moves to the left. We show something here, and then we hide that button, and it was just way faster.
Right.
And there were some other tricks that we found, like removing stuff from the DOM made things faster. Like for example, I have a blog post on this. I'm not going to show you now because it involves me like doing some surgery in the code, which I know some of you guys want to get out of here. But what we learned is that to get some of the most optimal performance, you have to be very greedy about which DOM you remove and be very sneaky as to when you re-inject it before you have an exception. So my point is that when this view here is on the page, you tap on the article and we slide in a sheet overlay. Now these items are technically in the DOM still. So when I rotate the device, reflow happens on both components and all their elements underneath. And by doing some careful manipulation of the elements, we're able to remove the carousel and everything you see here. As soon as that article was shown, I pulled it away from the DOM. It kept the memory reference. Okay, so all the event handlers were still there. And then when the person clicked the back button, threw it back in real quick, and all was well. And what that showed was that orientation change was lightning quick. There was no like seeing images reflow or anything. And even on the crappiest iPad 1, and what is it, the fourth gen, the first generation Retina display iPad, which was horribly underperforming, it was still really fast. Now, it didn't make its way into the production app because there were some timing issues that we had to deal with that we didn't want to throw in there, but it was definitely one of those things that we said, okay, next time we build an application, we're definitely going to have to, think about doing something like this. Yes?
So what were your targets then? Your device and...
It was iPad 1, iPad 2, the Retina iPad, and just before we launched, it was we tested on the iPad mini. We focused on those devices because the customer that was like most of their traffic. It would take minimal effort to throw more CSS queries in there to resize things for the Amazon Kindle, for example. We had an app we built for Sencha, a demo app called Discover Music. We built it purely for the iPad. And then just before Christmas, we decided to throw it into the Amazon Kindle, which, oh God, I could do a whole nother hour discussion on the awesomeness of those 4 devices and their uniqueness. But my point is that it took no more than 2.5 weeks to take an existing code base, reskin it, and have it look really awesome and performing well.
So Sencha Touch as a framework supports what?
WebKit-based browsers right now, and they are focusing on the Windows Phone devices right now as well. So we developed a prototype app. We have some gamers in our company, like a lot of folks do in our community, and they built a Diablo app for iOS, and they ported it over to Windows Phone 8, and it worked fantastically. So officially, Sencha Touch will support Windows Phone 8 with 2.2 when it comes out soon. Yes?
One of the warnings I've heard about Sencha Touch is that it's really complicated. This application looks great. Roughly how much developer time did it take to put that out?
Barring the technical challenges that we had, probably no more than a month and a half.
Okay.
Yeah.
Like one developer working.
That was me, yeah.
Okay.
I'm not going to lie to you. It's about a 1.5. Now, the other stuff, what I like to call the juicy 10%, all the awesome stuff like the history and the advertising, that stuff took more time, unfortunately. But the base application took no more than a month and a half.
Took more?
Huh?
More than a month and a half to develop the
Totally? Probably about maybe 2.5 months. Yeah, we had some challenges we had to overcome with advertising. We had the iframe issue with YouTube, for example, that we were trying to figure out, a rotating issue. So this app had to have been one of the most challenging Sencha Touch 2 apps that I developed in a while. And there were definitely some awesome learning experiences for me.
And one of the things, too, just to add on that, is that if you pull up the Atlantic Wire, just the blog site, it's an aggregator, right? So that content isn't necessarily mobile optimized. So what was interesting about when we were doing this app...
Turn around and talk to them, they can't hear you.
Sorry.
It's a big
talk
room.
to the wall.
It's a big room.
So, this was kind of like a leap of faith for the Atlantic. I mean, they still have native apps. This wasn't like an abandonment of things. It was essentially, looking at different ways to engage on these platforms. And I think from when we started talking to them to when we actually got it delivered, you kind of realize that there's what we kind of call above the waterline and under the waterline. Like if you're building an API, we had mocked up all kinds of things with users. We could create searches that they do, save those searches as tags to also build to their queries. But you start to realize when you go back upstream that, our API, we don't have an API for search and save, and our content isn't getting scrubbed for iframes that may contain flash video or other things that, just kind of drop out. I think the interesting part was that when we started this, we were doing an app for similar kind of concept, but hybrid for Fortune Magazine. So if you download the Fortune Magazine iPad app, it's a hybrid app that we built that has a similar concept, which is a dashboard content aggregator that keeps you engaged in the content, like until the next month's subscription revenue comes out. And then as we really started getting into some of the issues around, as Jay mentioned, the optimization, that's when Dave started doing some responsive design stuff with PBS, where we were just really trying to kind of get as much out of JavaScript and as much into CSS for just performance. So there was a lot of like other projects where we were almost kind of competing with our other internal teams about like the whole reflow, where they were saying, you guys are like screwing up your reflow because ours snaps immediately. And we were like, no, dude, that's not us. That's the... So, so a lot of people focus on the UI work itself, but there's so much on the just publishing workflow. And do you have a CMS that's like headless Drupal? Are you doing Django custom publishing? You know what I mean? And all those other lessons that you think about it as a total product, not just the client side, actually your mileage varies on how long it will take.
That's one way to put it, yeah. Any other questions? Yes?
Are you minifying your JavaScript or any error?
Awesome question. Yes. Well, I'm not doing it. Sencha touches. And I'll explain it to you in a second. So I'm going to open some hacking tools. So I'm going to show you what it looks like in development mode. That's probably a little too big. Let's resize that a little. There we go. All right, look at all this stuff. JavaScript goodness. A lot of this stuff comes from Sencha Touch itself. If I were to scroll all the way up to one point, you may see stuff from our application, maybe not. But the point is that when you're in development mode, you're loading a bunch of stuff on demand. So if I were to refresh this and query just on scripts, you'll see that even Chrome has trouble keeping up with everything. So when we go to development or production, before we actually get to production, we go to what's called testing. So that is a concatenation phase. That is a test to make sure that all of your application dependencies are documented in the application, requires, and so on and so forth. And you're not doing things like have debug statements in places where they don't belong. Then you have the production phase. Production phase is probably the coolest phase. I will show you. Let me see if I can do this. Hold on a second. Sorry, I got to do a little dirty work here. I apologize for the delay. All right, there we go. So if I were to go to the application directory, we have the base application structure, and I'm going to build what's called a testing build. So Sencha app build testing. So that is which version of the app to build and where to build it. So build testing. So it does some magic, does some concatenation, and there we go. So I can go to my browser, and if I were to look at the network tab, we should see that the scripts that are being loaded are not nearly as much. And the app.js contains thousands and thousands of lines of JavaScript. Yeah.
How big is that?
Oh, I don't know. Let's go see. .4 megs. Not a production build, though. Okay. But if you were to load this on a Wi-Fi, on even the slowest Android device, you'll find that the JavaScript engine isn't your issue. It's not network. It's all DOM. In fact, today it still is DOM. That is the issue. Now, if I were to inspect local storage, well, now I still have some saved articles in here that I'll remove. Let me go into the production phase. Sencha app build production. I can spell it. Build production. So here, I believe they use YUI compressor to concatenate, minify, and so on and so forth. And if I were to look at the app.js, so cd build production, $380K, not huge. With gzipping, it probably brings it down to like $30K or so. So if I were to go to, let's open a brand new browser. So build production. We'll open network tab, which he closed automatically. Again, we're making one script request for app.js. There's a bunch of other stuff that they're loading for the advertising. A fun part is here. See all this awesomeness? This is your JavaScript in local storage. This looks funny, but it's badass. With my device on the slowest connection, once the app is loaded, every time I load the app, I get it instantaneously. The slowest part becomes all the resources, the images, the data, but the app loads really fast. And that is a huge gain. So from here, if I make a change, I can load the app after the change is made and push to production. And the only thing that's downloaded from the browser from the app perspective is the delta, not the entire application again. And that's applied using local storage. Pretty awesome technology. So does that answer your question? Sorry, I realize it's a big question, but I figured, or a big answer, but I figured it was best served with that demonstration. Yes?
You said something at the beginning about how iPhone 5, I think, has amazing performance. What have you seen on Android? How much worse is it for this kind of stuff?
It is the case with Android that I hate using it as a blanket statement anymore. And it's one of those things when we talk to our customers that we tell them all the time that their dreams of doing iOS and Android, it's not a realistic dream because the market is so fragmented. I mean, I had the awesome experience of using a Craig tablet. Okay, this is a tablet you buy at CVS as an Android tablet. The keyboard took 3 seconds to come up on the browser. I mean, what are they thinking? My point is that, yes, there's this fragmentation everywhere with Android. So the best devices are the latest ones coming out. And the Chrome browser being built into the OS is definitely a huge addition on that space. But it's not perfect. But it's getting better all the time. So I would say the Galaxy S4 or the Nexus, even the Kindle Fire HD is pretty good. Is a pretty good performing device. If you go to I would say go to any Barnes & Noble. That's not the way you get them. Or any place they sell. GameStop sells Kindles, from what I understand. And if you were to look up Discover Music in the Amazon App Store, you'll see a pretty awesome performing HTML5 app. It's not great, especially if you compare it. In fact, I shit on it because I built it, and I hate everything I do. I'm a perfectionist. So even on the iPhone 5, I think it's it could always be better. But it's really good. I mean, to be honest, it's actually a really good performing HTML5 app. And we use very much the same design patterns, custom views, highly efficient, MVC, Sencha packaging. In fact, with that application, we actually have the package is really light. It's just PhoneGap, and it queries a remote server. So we can update the application. Amazon doesn't give a crap. Because, and then the user, when they load the application next time, they see the prompt that the application has been updated. They click yes to reload. They have the latest and greatest code. All from local storage. Pretty awesome stuff. Any other questions? Awesome. Well, thank you very much, guys. It's been a pleasure to come out here and talk to you. Here's my contact info. Feel free to reach out to me if you have any other questions or any other things you want to discuss regarding tech stuff. I'll be more than happy to come out again if you guys want me to talk more about this type of technology. But thanks.